Hey guys, welcome back to another Commander Deck Tech. It's your host Jesse, as always. We're bringing you one of my favorite Commander decks today. This is uh, just I love him so much. I love Aristocrat strategies, and so when they printed Korvold, I knew it was one of those things that I had to build. I've had this deck for a little while now. I've been working on it, tweaking it. So what you're seeing is the result of a lot of playtesting, a lot of tweaking, and getting this precisely where I want it. The finalized build has the mana base where I want it. I do not have the entirety of this mana base in paper. Normally, I don't believe that um, fetch lands, especially with their price point, are entirely necessary for Commander unless you're playing CEDH. However, the reason that fetch lands make a heavily prevalent appearance in this deck is because of their synergy with both Korvold, the Commander, and a couple of the other sacrifice synergies that we have in here. Because we are just looking to sacrifice anything and everything for value, whether it's lands, tokens, artifacts, everything. So we do have things that are going to capitalize off of us sacrificing permanents. But without further ado, let's get into the deck tech. And let's talk first about our commander. Our commander is Korvold, the Fey Cursed King. For 2 black, red, green, you get a 4/4 flyer with the fantastic creature type of Dragon Noble. I absolutely love it. And then whenever Korvold enters the battlefield or attacks, you sacrifice another permanent. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Korvold and draw a card. So obviously, the early game we're doing 2 things. We're ramping, and we're trying to get excess permanents on the battlefield that we don't need, so that way when we cast Korvold, we can feed him for value. So with the main focus of being Korvold, we have several things going for us. We have graveyard strategies, we have aristocrat strategies, not to mention we can splash in Reanimator, we have token generation, all to feed off of the main synergy of the deck. So we're going to get into the creatures that we're playing here. Obviously, if we're feeding things into the graveyard, a great card to feed into the graveyard is Anger. For 3 and a red, you get a 2/2 with haste, but as long as Anger is in your graveyard and you control a mountain, creatures you control have haste. This is obviously super important because our primary win con, if we're not winning through our little aristocrats drain people out strategy, is to get in for commander damage with Korvold. And so being able to drop Korvold in with haste is very important, so we have several haste enablers for him here. Anger is one of them. Up next, we have a bomb card that's going to generate you a ton of tokens for Korvold, and if you sacrifice him and then recur him later in the game, you can keep generating more and more value. And this lets Korvold, eat a nice salad, and that's Avenger of Zendikar. For 5 green, we get a 5/5. When Avenger of Zendikar enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 plant creature token for each land you control. And then the landfall ability of whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control. And then the landfall ability of whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. So, obviously, it's meant to, you create all these plants, you grow them by playing more lands, they get big, you do things, blah, blah, blah. That's great, but more importantly, this says to me, let me make a ton of tokens while also getting a nice little 5/5 threat that is going to create a bunch of food for Korvold and our sacrifice synergies. Up next, obviously, if we are playing a aristocrat strategy, we got to have a Blood Artist. For 1 and a black, you get a 0/1 vampire. Whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So, again, you get to this is going to be one of the ways you win. You're just draining people out of the game, after slapping them for some high damage with Korvold or maybe some of your other bigger threats, and then you can just sink everything into cannibalizing what you have for value. Obviously, it wouldn't be a reference to the standard deck that I actually played earlier this week if we didn't have Cauldron Familiar. For a single black mana, you get a 1/1 cat that has, when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life, and then you may sacrifice a food to return Cauldron Familiar from your graveyard to the battlefield. The oven is in here, spoiler alert, we'll get to that later, but for those of you who don't know, this is a heavy standard synergy where there's a card called Witch's Oven that you can tap, sacrifice a creature, it produces a food token, so you give the oven the cat, then you get a food out of that, then you sacrifice the food, the cat comes back. So that's 2 sacrifice triggers for if you have Korvold on the field. Not to mention, if you have other ways to sacrifice it and you have the food to keep bringing the familiar back, you could just draw a bunch of cards. Up next, we have Dockside Extortionist. For 1 and a red, you get a 1/2 Goblin Pilot that when it enters the battlefield, you create X treasure tokens, where X is the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control. And with how Commander is focused around mana rocks and sometimes enchantment-based ramp like Mirari's Wake and things like that, this can just, even in a low enchantment and artifact game, make you 4 or 5 treasures by itself, which is fantastic ramp. And also, how do you spend treasures? You sacrifice them, and that just is more fuel for Korvold. We have an Eternal Witness for 1 green. You get a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. I mean, we're sacrificing a lot of cards. We want recursion, so that hopefully we can sacrifice these things again. Like, if we feed our Avenger of Zendikar into Korvold, and then we play Eternal Witness, get him back, and make a whole bunch more plants. Seems like good value. Next, we have one of the new additions that I absolutely love, and that is Fiend Artisan. For 2 hybrid Golgari mana, you get a 1/1 Nightmare that has Fiend Artisan gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard, and then you may pay X and a Golgari hybrid, tap and sacrifice another creature, search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, and put it onto the battlefield. Then shuffle your library. You can only activate this ability anytime you can cast sorcery. So, you have the nice little ability there to pay a mana cost +1, tap, sacrifice one of your tokens, and then pull something powerful directly out of the deck. So let's say you haven't drawn your Avenger of Zendikar yet. For the low cost of 8 mana, you do get to sacrifice a token and then slam him into play and then make a whole bunch more tokens. Obviously, this scales as the game goes and gets more powerful. That's like obviously late game play. But even things like a well-timed sacking a token to get a Plague Crafter just so you can edict out an opponent's threat is really good here. As for other token producers, you might net off that. Goblin Rabblemaster. 2 and a red for a 2/2. Other goblin creatures you control attack each turn if able. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token with haste. Whenever Goblin Rabblemaster attacks, it gains +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking goblin. So this is more for just a continuous stream of goblins than anything. It's a great way to just have a bunch of tokens that you can feed to Korvold, and he's going to keep putting them out. Not to mention, if you need to, you can go with the Rabblemaster, go wide goblin aggro plan. You can do that. And you have there's a couple other things in here that are going to make some goblin tokens, so that may not be so bad. Golgari Finebroker, it's basically a weaker Eternal Witness, but it's still really solid here. For double black, double green, we get a 3/4 Elf Shaman, so a little bit more substantial body. And when it enters the battlefield, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. Eternal Witness can get anything. This only gets permanents. So, for 1 more mana, you get a much beefier body and a little bit more of a restriction on what you can get out of the graveyard. So, it has its uses, but it's nice to have, effective duplicates of cards. Then we have a Greven Predator Captain. This is one of my favorite additions to the deck. For 3 black-red, we get a 5/5 Menace. Whenever Greven Predator Captain gets +X/+O, where X is the amount of life you've lost this turn. Whenever Greven attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, draw cards equal to that creature's power, and you lose life equal to that creature's toughness. Oh, so yawny. So, when you're sacrificing to Greven, higher power, lower toughness. Things like Eternal Witness. Draw 2, only lose 1, seem good. You're going to want to look for those things that have high power and low toughness. Obviously, anything works, though, in a pinch. And again, it's more sacrifice outlets for Korvold. Another one of my favorite consistent token producers with huge payoff in this deck is Grismold, the Dreadsower. For 1 black-green, you get a 3/3 legendary creature Troll Shaman with Trample. At the beginning of your end step, each player creates a 1/1 green plant creature token. Whenever a creature token dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Grismold, the Dreadsower. So you get, plants you can feed to Korvold. Those in turn make Grismold bigger. Plus, your opponent's gaining those plants. They're going to need to use them to chump block against these bigger threats. So then Grismold just keeps getting bigger, and he's just a really nice magnet for your opponent's removal, and I really like him in this deck. Speaking of creatures dying, Judith the Scourge Diva is another way to turn that to your advantage. For 1 black-red, you get a 2/2 human shaman that says other creatures you control get +1/+O, so giving us a nice little aggressive incentive here. And then whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Judith the Scourge Diva deals 1 damage to any target. Now, obviously, we are making a lot of tokens, so we miss out on the synergy a little bit there, but we also have some other things that will be getting sacrificed out of our own creatures. So being able to creep in for that little bit of damage, it doesn't hurt. Next, we have a Krenko Mob Boss. For 2 red, you get a 3/3 that says tap, create X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins you control. You can see how this plus Rabblemaster can get really out of hand. And you just overwhelm your opponents with goblins, and then suddenly when the goblins aren't good enough to get in, you have your sack outlets to drain your opponents the rest of the way, or you just end up feeding Korvold a diet of goblins for a little while. So you have that route you can go as well. Obviously, also, if you played standard variations of this deck, Mayhem Devil is another card that you're going to play and have played in the standard version of this deck. For 1 black-red, a 3/3 devil that says whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target. Really, really good here. Meren, Clan of Neltoth is a new addition to the deck. I like the idea of having something to benefit off of our creatures dying. So for 2 black-green, you get a 3/4. Whenever another creature control dies, you get an experience counter. Beginning your end step, choose target creature card in your graveyard. If that card's converted mana cost is less than or equal to the number of experience counters you have, return it to the battlefield. Otherwise, put it in your hand. So it's basically, at worst, free card draw every turn, because you get to recur 1 creature from your graveyard. And at best, you're cheating that creature back into play. So you're reusing Enter the Battlefield abilities, you're getting more bodies. Really, really fantastic card here. A little small card that I like in here is Mog War Marshal. For 1 and a red, you get a 1/1 with Echo for 1 and a red. But when it enters the battlefield or dies, you get to create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. Keep in mind, not paying the Echo cost causes you to sacrifice the card. So, Um, so Mog War Marshal is a nice way to get a guaranteed sacrifice trigger and put 2 other bodies onto the battlefield for Korvold or any of your sacrifice shenanigans to take advantage of. And then we have a Pawn of Ulamog. For 1 black, whenever Pawn of Ulamog or another non-token creature you control dies, you may create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token. It has sacrifice this creature, add colorless to your mana pool. So again, another nice little way to ramp, and also more sacrifice synergies for Korvold. Pitiless Plunder kind of does the same thing. Whenever another creature you control dies, create a colorless treasure artifact token with sacrifices artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. That'll cost you 3 and a black for a 1/4. And obviously this is extremely powerful because it doesn't say non-token. So you have Pawn of Ulamog out, you sacrifice some of your regular creatures, you get those as Eldrazi spawns now, and you get the Pitiless Plunderer treasures, and then you use those to cast something, and then so when you sacrifice all those spawns, Pitiless Plunder is going to make treasures for each of those. So it's like turning colored mana or colorless mana into colored mana, while also floating that colorless mana. Seems really good. And between the 2 of these and a couple of the other things, you're going to be able to really pay the commander tax on Korvold a lot. Obviously, we have a Plague Crafter in here. Because it sacrifices creatures and planeswalkers for everyone. Yay! We just benefit from that sacrifice trigger as well. Then we have a card that a lot of people despise because it was made really busted until they recently banned the card that made it busted, and that is them banning Flash made Protean Hulk fair, in my opinion. It is still a 7 mana 6/6 that when it dies, or when it gets put into the graveyard from play, search your library for any number of creature cards with a total converted mana cost of 6 or less, put them into play, then shuffle your library. So obviously, I'm using this card in here. Not just, it can be a body and be a threat if need be, and then force your opponent to remove it, but also, this is a nice little way to get your sacrifice packages online. Maybe you need to get a Judith, a Blood Artist, and a Viscera Seer. And then you have your nice little sacrifice package online. You have a bunch of, creatures that you can feed into that. So this is a way to just tutor out the specific pieces you need to get the machine going, to feed the beast, so to say. Then we have one of the beasts you might want to feed. Razaketh, the Foul-Blooded. For 5 and triple black, you get an 8/8 flying trample that has pay 2 life, sacrifice another creature, search your library for a card, and put that card into your hand. Then shuffle your library. So for sacrificing a creature and 2 life, you get to demonic tutor any card and put it into your hand. In a sacrifice deck, this is bonkers good. And what's funny is, like, when this card came out, it was like a $2 card, and now it's casually like climbed up to almost $18. So even like when you see something dumb like this for Commander in a standard set, and at the time it's like a $2 card, if you can afford, pick up a couple copies, like, because you never know when something like this is gonna just slowly climb up out of nowhere because they haven't reprinted it. And I think this is a really good example of that card. I didn't even realize this card had climbed to this price until just now when I was doing this deck tech, and I saw the TCG player average on Tapped Out, where I have the deck set up to read. So that was like just a little tiny rant here in the middle. Like when a new set comes out, like we're about to see M21, look at the cards that you think, oh, that's a really good Commander card, and at set's launch, if you can't played in Standard, played in Modern, it doesn't really see any play, but it's a good Commander card, and they're like $1 or $2. Pick a couple up and sit on them for a couple years, because in 3-4 years they might suddenly be $17-18, and you'll really regret not buying one for $1 a couple years ago. Anyhow, back to the deck tech. Spring Bloom Druid, 2 and a green for a 1/1. And it has Harrow basically printed on it. It's a creature with Harrow. If you don't know what Harrow does, when Springbloom Druid enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a land. If you do, search your library for up to 2 basic lands. You get to put them onto the battlefield tapped. So you get a sacrifice trigger, it ramps you, and you also get a 1/1 out of there that you can sacrifice or jump block with. So do like that in here. We also playing Syr Konrad the Grim. Up next we have Syr Konrad the Grim for 3 black. Whenever another creature dies or is put into your graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Syr Konrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. And then you can pay 1 and a black. Each player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. Obviously, with all of our sacrifice synergies, you can see how this payoff happens. We don't really care about the second ability, but it might come up every now and then. Do you want to know those things are there? And plus he's a 5/4, and that's a nice reasonable threat to get in at your opponent. Up next we have the Gitrog monster. For 3 black-green, you get a 6/6 with Death Touch. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice the Gitrog monster unless you sacrifice a land. You may play an additional land on each of your turns, and whenever 1 or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. So, sacrifice triggers synergize with Korvold. You're drawing more cards now that you have both Gitrog monster and Korvold on the battlefield. Things like Harrow, blah blah blah. Also, if you're just blind milling off of Syr Konrad, this is a way that you can potentially get some extra card advantage. Pay 2 mana, mill the top card off of everybody. You happen to mill a land, then you draw a card off Gitrog, so not bad. Next we have a really fun inclusion in the deck. I really am high up on this card for this deck, and that's Thopter Assembly. It's a 6 mana 5/5 flying Thopter that says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control no Thopters other than Thopter Assembly, return Thopter Assembly to its owner's hand and create 5 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. So, Thopter Assembly, upkeep, it bounces back to your hand, you get the 1/1s, you can then feed the 1/1s wherever you need to. Also, they're token creatures, so any of your creature synergies help out there. And you have a few artifact synergies, but nothing I don't really think that cares about the sacrificing of artifacts. And then Thrashing Brontodon. For 1 green, you get a 3/4 that has pay 1, sacrifice Thrashing Brontodon, destroy target artifact or enchantment. I went with this over some of the more speedy or efficient artifact removal because, again, this is just another nice little sacrifice trigger. Another game-ending threat that can really screw up an opponent or save you depending on where life totals are is Torgar, Famine Incarnate. For 6 black, you get a 7/6. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice any number of creatures. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each creature sacrificed this way. And when Torgar, Famine Incarnate, enters the battlefield, up to 1 target player's life total becomes half of their starting life total rounded down. So you can have somebody who is at a higher life total down to 20 in Commander, basically. Can make anyone's life total 20. Also, if your life total is low, this is a way to heal yourself up to 20. So nice little way to jump there. Card we mentioned earlier, Viscera Seer. It's just a very cheap, efficient sacrifice outlet. For a single black mana, you get a 1/1 that says sacrifice a creature, scry 1. Simple, clean, does what you need it to do. And then finally, our last creature in the deck is Zulaport Cutthroat. For 1 and a black, you get a 1/1 human rogue ally that says when Zulaport Cutthroat or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So, again, keeps you alive, aristocrat strategy, pinging down your opponents, and just otherwise a fantastic card. For our artifacts, we are playing Arcane Signet, so if you bought the Korvold Precon, that's what this was originally built out of. and then I just heavily started modifying it to get it to where I wanted. But you do get the Arcane Signet in there, so that always helps. I put a Coalition Relic in here. It's a 3 mana rock. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, or you can tap it, put a charge counter on Coalition Relic. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, remove all charge counters from Coalition Relic, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool for each charge counter removed. So keep in mind it says pre-combat main phase. So what you can do is it's kind of going to let you accelerate 1 additional mana. You tap it, you put a charge counter on it, then during your upkeep, before you move into your main, after your untap step, and it's untapped, it has 1 charge counter, you can tap it again, get the second charge counter on there, and then on your turn, you get 2 mana out of it. However, you can also just tap it, put the charge counter on your turn. Charge counter comes off during your pre-combat main phase, and then you can just tap this to produce the mana too. So unless you have maybe proliferate shenanigans or anything else to interact with this card, maybe your opponent is proliferating and you can be like, hey, help me out here and I'll help you out. That's just a little interaction with this card to know about. Other than that, just a really solid mana rock. We are playing a Golden Egg. It's basically a free cycle, like it cycles itself, but when it comes into play, you draw another card. And then it has 2 different ways to sacrifice it. Also, it's a food. You don't have a ton of food synergies, but technically it is a food, so if you need it to get back your Cauldron Familiar, you can sacrifice it there as well. Ichor Wellspring, 2 mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. So again, it cycles, but then when you sacrifice a Korvold, you get to draw another card. Lightning Greaves, again, part of our plans to help give Korvold haste. Also, this gives him Shroud, so it helps prevent your opponent from blowing him out with a targeted removal spell. Mycosynth Wellspring, very similar except to the Ichor Wellspring, except when it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. So, again, doing the same thing as the Ichor Wellspring, but another way to kind of fix your mana as well. Then we have a treasure map. For 2, you get an artifact that has, you can pay 1, tap it, scry, and put a scry 1 and put a landmark counter on treasure map. Then if there are 3 or more landmark counters, remove those counters, transform treasure map, and create 3 colorless 1/1 treasure artifact tokens. With sacrifice of this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So, and of course this flips around into Treasure Cove, where it can either tap for a colorless, or you can tap it, sacrifice a treasure, draw a card. See how all these sacrificing treasure things synergize with Korvold. And then finally, the Witch's Oven. I explained how this worked earlier, so I'm not going to go over it now. We are playing 9 enchantments in the deck. First up, Animate Dead. That should be self-explanatory. We are sacrificing our stuff constantly. Recurring it for value is even better, especially when we can recur it efficiently. Animate Dead is one of those efficient ways. Then we have an Awakening Zone. Absolutely love this card. At the beginning of your upkeep, it's an enchantment that is 2 and a green. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token onto the battlefield. It has sacrifice this creature, add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. So, obviously, with this, you have a way to keep a nice little stream of incoming tokens that have a self-sacrifice ability built in for Korvold for easy feeding and also for ramp. Speaking of enchantments that provide ramp, Black Market. For 3 black, you get an enchantment that says, whenever a creature dies, put a charge counter on Black Market. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, add black to your mana pool for each charge counter on Black Market. Wow. Seems really good in here. That just seems bonkers powerful. And you're going to be able to generate so much extra mana off this. Next we have Dictate of Erebos. For 3 black, you get an enchantment with Flash. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Now we're getting into ways to turn your self-sacrificing strategy into ways to control your opponent's board and prevent them from, amassing an army to kill you. So that always helps. We have Dreadhorde Invasion. Again, a nice way to get a steady stream of creature tokens to feed to Korvold. Not to mention that if you don't need to sack it and you can grow, it'll just keep growing into a bigger and bigger threat each turn. And you have plenty of ways to mitigate the life loss, so it really isn't too big of a deal. Then we have Fires of Yapimaya. Again, we're trying to give Korvold haste as much as possible. So 1 red-green creatures you control have haste. And then, of course, sacrifice Fires of Yapimaya. Target creature gets +2/+2 till end of turn. It may not be a lot, but it might be the thing that seals you the game. Plus, not to mention, you're at a point where Korvold doesn't need the haste. You don't really need anything else to give the haste. You can always just cash this out with Korvold on the field. So there is that line. Then we have a Grave Pact. For 1 and triple black, whenever a creature you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each other player sacrifices a creature. So it's just like Dictate of Erebos, except we're doubling down. And this one doesn't have Flash, costs 1 less mana. But again, you stack 2 of these effects onto the battlefield and start feeding your creatures into, your sacrifice synergy. Suddenly, for each 1 creature you sacrifice, your opponents have to sacrifice 2. That gets really out of hand. It's out of hand with 1, but like when it's 2, oh my, it can be brutal. Also, to capitalize off creatures dying, Open the Greaves. In my opinion, a very underrated enchantment. I absolutely love this enchantment. For 3 black, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So now you stack this up with things like Pawn of Ulamog and Pitiless Plunderer. Now, whenever a non-token dies, you're getting an Eldrazi spawn, a 2/2 zombie, and a treasure. Like you're just taking each creature and wringing it into 3 different essences that you can then sacrifice to other synergies, or just maybe amass a whole big horde of zombies and overrun your opponents. The final enchantment is one that helps with taking advantage of the fact that you're going to be sacrificing things by letting you cheat something powerful into play. Pattern of Rebirth is 3 and a green for an aura enchantment, enchant creature. When enchanted creature is put into a graveyard from play, that creature's controller may search his or her library for a creature card, put that card into play, and then shuffle your library. So being able to tutor out the exact piece you need, the exact moment you need it, just by paying for and sacrificing a creature. There is room for blowout here, targeted removal, blah, blah, blah. You can get 2 for 1. But if they really want to go to that length, then you're probably getting them to sink a heavy resource into something that could be a little bit more trivial anyhow. Planeswalker-wise, we are playing 1 Planeswalker in here. We have, coming all the way from Standard All-Star herself, Liliana Dreadhorde General. For 4 black, you get a 6 loyalty Liliana that has a static ability of whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. Automatically, you can see how that's nice. Her +1 creates a 2/2 black zombie creature token. She has a -4 where each player sacrifices 2 creatures. Again, really nice with the synergy here. And then finally, her -9 is each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifices the rest. Most importantly, this strips your opponents down to 1 land. They're going to have 1 land, then their best creature, their best artifact, their best enchantment, maybe a best planeswalker. But that leaves them with 5 things on the field, and you're just cruising in, ready to go. Obviously, you're probably not going to get to Ultimate Liliana, but if you do, my god, it is over. Just make sure you can close out the game quickly, or otherwise the rest of the table is going to be really annoyed. We're running 3 instants in the deck. We run a Harrow, since we are running the creature version as well. For 2 and a green, you have an instant with, as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a land. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So, a nice little ability there. Synergizes well. We are playing a Summoner's Pact. You get a 0 mana green instant. Search your library for a green creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. At the beginning of your next upkeep, pay 2 green. If you don't, you lose the game. So no way to abuse that. We're just playing it fairly, using it as basically a free tutor to play during our opponent's end step, and then we'll tap down and accept the ability to kind of not really do too much for a turn, but get the exact thing that we think we're going to need as we're putting our machine together to feed the beast. Finally, our last instant is Wake the Dead. For 2 black and X, you get an instant with cast Wake the Dead only during your combat on an opponent's turn. Return X target creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Sacrifice those creatures at the beginning of the next end step. So, you have a great way to return your entire graveyard back to the field for a turn, to chump block or do blocks, and then sacrifice in response for value. Really like that interaction here. I think it's a very underrated card, and it can do wonders at saving your butt, as well as giving you just a way to, at instant speed, drain a bunch of people out of the game. So, fantastic card. Getting into the sorceries, we have Casualties of War for 2 black, green. Choose 1 or more. Destroy target artifact, destroy target creature, destroy target enchantment, destroy target land, destroy target planeswalker. This card does it all. But most importantly, you can do each of them. So I just feel this is an all-star commander card. If you're in the Golgari Kellers, I think at this point you just kind of need to play it, because it lets you just snipe things out. Hit the problem creature, hit the problem artifact, hit the problem enchantment, kill that Dark Depths or whatever is your opponent's going to Vesuva on their next turn, and just stop a bunch of dumb things from happening. Then we have Command the Dreadhorde. Fantastic card. Mass reanimation. It is going to run you a lot of life, but getting all these creatures back, and then being able to combo off with sacrifice outlets and stuff is going to be really important. We have a Cultivate, very important ramp spell. 2 and a green. Search your library for 2 basic lands, put 1 into play tapped and the other into your hand. Dread Return for 2 black. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Also flashes back by sacrificing 3 creatures, so all those tokens you're generating, you can get one of your power hitters from the graveyard back. Maybe one that makes more tokens by sacrificing 3 creatures. Eldritch Evolution for 1 green, and sacrificing a creature. Search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, where X is 2 plus the sacrifice creature's converted mana cost. Put it directly onto the battlefield. Shuffle your library, exile Eldritch Evolution. So a nice little way to turn a 2 mana creature into a 4 mana creature, or something along those lines. Also, it's going to again give you another sacrifice ability. We have Faithless Looting for some fantastic drawing and discarding, keeping us churning through our deck. And then also, of course, you can flash that card back. Farseek as another piece of ramp, 1 and a green. Get anything that isn't a forest, seems good. And keep in mind that is typed lands, so if you're playing shocks or things of that nature, maybe the Battle for Zendikar battle lands, those all are capable of getting hit off Farseek. Gruesome Menagerie is a card that not a lot of people are on, but I think really works nicely in this deck because you're playing a lot of cheap, efficient creatures that you're sacrificing for value. So for 3 black, choose a creature card with converted mana cost 1 in your graveyard, then do the same for creature cards with converted mana cost 2 and 3, return them into the battlefield. So for 5 mana, you get to replay 6 mana worth of creatures out of your graveyard, or playing some very, very good, efficient creatures, you can get back your Mayhem Devil, your Viscera Seer, and a Dockside Extortionist. Like, seems really good for the low price of 5 mana. Like, I think this card is getting slept on in certain strategies, and I think more people should be playing this card, and it works wonderfully in here. Also, I do like to be kind and give my opponents offerings, primarily of the Infernal variety. Infernal Offering for 4 and a black, you get a sorcery that says, choose an opponent, you and that player each sacrifice a creature. Each player who sacrificed a creature this way draws 2 cards, and then choose an opponent, return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, then that player returns a creature card from his or her graveyard to the battlefield. So, obviously, you get a sacrifice trigger and to draw some cards. You make an opponent with a really good creature that maybe they're playing like Voltron strategy and they only have 1 good creature out. Suddenly, it's an edict effect. They got to sacrifice theirs and only get compensated 2 cards, and maybe they have like 4 pairs of pants on this creature. For those of you who don't know, pants are what we refer enchantment auras to. And then you pick somebody with nothing in their graveyard. Maybe they just got their graveyard exiled by like a Majuka Bog or something. And you're like, hey, you can return a creature card, but you don't have one. Oh, I'll just reanimate that really good creature I sacrificed. Or I'll sacrifice a terrible creature, and I'll get a good creature back. This is a great way to flicker, pseudo-flicker things like Avenger of Zendikar, and Torgar, things like that, to get extra value. We have an Innocent Blood, again, a 1 mana, very powerful edict effect. Each player sacrifices a creature. For a single black mana, that's really good. Kodama's Reach, 2 and a green, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal them, put 1 on the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand. It's another version of Cultivate. Also, Rampant Growth. It does only get basics, but for 1 and a green, it's cheap and effective. Reanimate. Not much to say here. It's a reanimate. It's super powerful. And also, it's going to get you back whatever you need. You're going to pay some life. Back on to trying to bargain and tempt your opponent. We have Tempt with Immortality. For 4 and a black, which is in the standard rate, this is what a reanimator spell costs now. But with the caveat of Tempting Offer on here, that's why I pinnacle this card and think it's worth playing. So, Tempt with Immortality, it has Tempting Offer. You're going to return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Each opponent may return a creature card from his or her graveyard to the battlefield. For each player who does, you get to return an additional creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, at base level, you're getting a standard resurrection spell with no drawbacks. At peak power, each of your opponent, yeah, they get to get back their best thing, but if their best thing isn't good enough, or can't combine together to defeat you, you're getting back more and more pieces that maybe were cleared out in the wrath. So, do like that card, understand the risk with it, but I think it's a risk worth taking. It is black after all. Then we have Treasured Find. For a black and a green, you get a sorcery that says return target card from your graveyard to your hand, exile Treasure Find. So this lets you just net back anything that's in the graveyard, gives you, nice recursion. And finally, one of my favorite reanimation spells, Victimize. For 2 and a black, choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard, sacrifice a creature. If you do, return the chosen cards to the battlefield tapped. Boom. Boom. Reanimate 2 big threats by sacrificing a 1 token. It's really good, and it's 3 mana, and it's also only like a $2 uncommon. So I think this is not only a very good card, but also it's budget friendly. And I know there are some people who are a little bit more budget conscious. Finally, getting on to lands. I'm not going to go over everything. I'm just going to kind of give you some highlights. We are playing a lot of fetches. The link for the deck list is in the description. I'm not playing the off-color fetches, but I am playing the on-color fetches plus Fabled Passage and Prismatic Vista, plus the more budget-akin ones, Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse. So we do have those. We do have the correct targeted shock lands. We're also going to play the battle lands as well. Also, we have a Field of the Dead in here because, again, generating tokens is great. We want that synergy. So our actual basic count is very low because we're trying to get, very quickly get up to the diverse number we need for that. Other than that, we got a Nurturing Peatland in here because it does sacrifice itself to draw a card. So if we need that extra card draw later on in the game, we have it there. Pretty much everything else is self-explanatory. I don't think there's anything that would be too confusing if I don't go over it. That being said, that's the deck tech. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next week. Peace.